Welcome learners. Today we are going to have our first lecture for the course MGPE 012 Women and Peace, which is one of the courses of the Gandhian Studies program. And we are going to have the session on women and society that must have been discussed in the unit, that is unit 1, Women's Place and Role. And I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, Faculty, School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU. I am the course coordinator for the course MGPE 012 and we are going to have the lecture on women and society today. With this, I welcome you all to this session and I hope you will enjoy listening and watching this video. What is the learning outcome? After watching this video, you are expected to learn about women's social position and role in the society, comprehend various strands of feminist thoughts and other perspectives on the relationship between women and society, and understand concepts related to gender relations and gender dynamics in the context of development discourse. What are the aims and objectives of this particular session? After going through the lecture, you will be able to analyze the interrelationship between women and society from a feminist lens or perspective. You will be able to critically discuss women's position and role in the society with reference to social institutions such as caste, class, religion, ethnicity, and so on. And familiarize with concepts related to gender mainstreaming, gender analysis, with an aim to incorporate gender needs or concerns into the development discourse. With these objectives, let us look at more into how women's role and place within the society has been analyzed by various feminists as well as sociological scholars, by various feminists as well as sociologists in general. Women's role in the society. Gender has been an organizing principle of the society. As you know, there is a big difference between sex and gender. When we speak about sex, sex is a biological category, and when we discuss about gender, gender is essentially a social category or socially constructed category. Therefore, gender along with other social institutions such as family, marriage, caste, class, religion and ethnicity shapes the social structure of the past and the present of any society and culture. Hence, women's question has been central to not only women's movement in India and in the globe, but in India, it was central to the 19th century social reformers, and it was a significant component for building the nation state as well. Understanding women's role. How do we understand women's role? And there we are going to speak about multiple perspectives or multiple discourses. The first discourse which I am going to speak about on Oriental discourse. This addressed the women's question in relation to various ancient texts, and the focal point was the ritual of sati. You must be familiar with the ritual of sati and what is the feminist criticism on the sati pratha. And the second discourse is ancient cultural discourse. Here I am going to discuss about the work of Susan Wadless, which she did the work in the year 1977 and in the year 1988. The work is on women and Hindu tradition, constructed the idea of an ideal Hindu woman. In her work, she argues that the Indian society represents a duality with regard to the nature of femaleness. On the one hand, a woman is benevolent, generous, fertile, and on the other, she is malevolent, aggressive, and destructive, which you could actually see these characteristics of or the nature of femaleness not only in our myths but various social practices what we observe in different states of India. Wadley further explains this dualism with reference to two forms associated with women, namely Sakti representing the energy form and Prakriti connotes to nature. Sakti is the creative female principle that defines both divinity and power associated with procreation or the sphere of reproduction. Prakriti represents the counterpart of the cosmic person Purusa, which represents the undifferentiated source of the nature and the spirit. The unity of Purusa and Prakriti has been the foundational belief behind biological conception. Therefore, and they also have been put, Purusa and Prakriti also shares some kind of hierarchical relationship, and which you could see in the social reality when women and men share relationship within the institution of family and also in public spheres like in the market. Female represents both facets of femininity, which include Sakti and Prakriti, and she is capable of eradicating the evil. Wordless analysis of power and nature can be used as a framework to understand the existing gender relations in the society. Within the dualistic framework of Purusa and Prakriti, women symbolizes with earth or field and the man represents the culture. Therefore, we not only in India but across the globe also there is a dualism between women and men, nature and culture, body and mind, emotion and instrumental nature. And this dualism has been the framework of analysis for feminists in order to understand women's position, social position and roles in the society. This framework is also further explained by various scholars like Leela Dubey in her work on symbolization of biological reproduction. Dubey in the year 1986 states that how symbolization of biological reproduction is expressed through terms like seed and the earth. Seed gives life to the child which comes from the father's blood, and on the other hand, earth identifies with womb, which provides warmth and nourishment to the fetus and its growth. This dichotomy of seed and earth depicts the role of mother as nurturer and caregiver within the home. Similarly, it also manifests the role of the father as the breadwinner of the family. And therefore, we say that gender is socially constructed. Not only it is constructed through institutions like family, marriage, education, caste, class, ethnicity, but largely it has been shaped. Why a girl behaves like a girl or a boy behaves like a boy is largely shaped and determined by the socialization process. Similarly, women in different myths and culture have also been valorized in two separate ways: for their spiritual potential and their role as sahadharminis or partners in rituals. The second is as heroic registers to alien forces. And you must have also come across the narratives of Kshatriyani virtues, having courage. And you can always look the work of Datta to explain or to know more about how women in the past have played the role of a heroic register. Next, come to the Gandhian perspective. What was Gandhi's framework of understanding women's position and role? It's very important since the course is on women and peace. Gandhi's view on women falls within the moralistic approach. For him, women are not the weaker gender. Moreover, she is the embodiment of sacrifice, humility, faith and knowledge. Women need to follow the path of self-help and self-sufficiency to be able to acquire their subjective identity. Gandhian framework believes that women can acquire their space in society through their actions based on the principle of satyagraha. He believes that women cannot act as objects. Women can have agency and choice, which they can acquire only through education. So within the Gandhian framework, we can see that women can have agency and women are not the objects in the hands of the men, but they have their subjective identities and autonomy in different spaces. Next comes the socialist Marxian perspective. Socialist feminists contested the Marxist idea of labor that only benefits to the bourgeoisie in the proliferation of capital and the wealth. In this, within the framework of social Marxian perspective, for today's lecture, I have taken the work of Annette Kuhn in the year 1978. She argued that family as part of the existing social system has been the site of women's subordination across societies. She further states that Karl Marx in his book Das Kapital emphasizes the significance of reproductive labor to capital, but could not explain the site, that is family, where it reproduced. Friedrich Engels states that women's subordination is shaped by the creation of private property as it created new economic relations or new forms of labor relations within the market and also in the family. Some socialist feminists reject this idea of Engels and argue that, particularly it is Annette Kuhn who argued that women's subordination lies in the bourgeoisie ideology, which believes in appropriating women's labor within the family and even when they enter into the labor market. Now, since we have covered a bit of theoretical framework to understand women's role and their social position in the society, let us look at how we can relate women in development or women with the development process. To start the discussion on women and development or women in development, the very important question which the very important notion or the concept which we all must understand, that is mainstreaming gender. So what is gender mainstreaming or what is mainstreaming gender? Gender mainstreaming in simple term means in incorporating gender needs, gender concerns, gender issues in the structure, culture and practice of different organizations where we all are working. Whether it is the government or the civil society organization or the scientific institutions or any research institutions. So the culture and the practice in the structure, practice and culture of the organization, we have to be sensitive to be able to understand gender needs and incorporate gender concern and issues. According to Maya Buvenik in the year 1984, mainstreaming gender in organizations is only possible if we pay attention to three issues: the internal and external political processes in which a particular development organization and its members may be engaged. Second, the setting up of the so-called missionaries entrusted with the task of incorporating women and or gender issues into the design and implementation of policies. The development of appropriate tools and technical capabilities. So this is how, at least if we have to achieve the goal of mainstreaming gender, we must pay attention to these three issues, and which has been discussed by Marsh in the year 1999. Mainstreaming gender is both a technical and a political process which requires shifts in organizational cultures and ways of thinking, as well as in the goals, structures and resource allocation of internal agencies, governments and NGOs. It means to integrating gender concerns into the culture, structure and the practice of any organization where we are located or situated. How do we achieve the goal of gender analysis? Gender analysis is a kind of a framework or tool to be able to implement policies and programs, schemes related to gender mainstreaming. Gender analysis is the framework to understand relationship of women and men in society and the inequalities in those relationships by asking questions: who does what, who has what, who decides and how they decide who gains and who loses. Whether it is the private sphere, that is family, public sphere, that is organization, or the community where both women and men are involved, we are going to ask this question: who does what, and how the gender roles have been segregated in different spheres of our society. Gender analysis breaks down the divide between the private sphere and the public sphere. Private sphere largely involves the family, public sphere which deals with the relationship in wider society. So when you break down the difference that exists between the private and the public sphere, we will be effectively able to implement or mainstream gender into our everyday life. To be able to understand and implement different tools of gender analysis, we need to be familiar with certain concepts. The first, in this lecture, I am going to briefly discuss about certain key concepts. The first is condition and position, because the concept of gender, you know that it is socially constructed, and it has been explained in the initial part of this video. So what is social condition and position? Condition describes the immediate material circumstances in which men and women live, related to their present workloads and responsibilities. Position describes the place of women in society relative to that of men. Changing women's position in society requires addressing women's strategic gender needs. For example, changing women's position in society will not happen overnight. It has, women's movement has immense contribution in terms of addressing issues with regard to women's subordination and oppression. Similarly, programs and policies also play a very important role for mainstreaming gender issues in the development the discourse. As I said, changing women's position in society requires addressing women's strategic gender needs, which can be achieved through education, by giving employment or livelihood to women, or addressing their certain practical gender needs. For example, addressing the increasing violence against women, providing safety and security in the workplace, and through implementing gender sensitive laws such as the Domestic Violence Act, Hindu Succession Act, and so forth. The next concept is access and control. Access to resources and control over the resources. Access is defined as the opportunity to make use of a resource. We may be having the access, but we really need to to empower women. A woman must need to have the control over the resources. So therefore, access is different from control. Control, the power to decide how a resource is used and who has access to it. For instance, women often have access to land but no ownership over the land. So you may have come across in different states that women have access to land but they have no control or the ownership over the land. Therefore, access and control over the resources are very important to be able to empower women in the society, or to create a gender just society. The third concept is status and role. The visible gender roles and invisible power relations between women and men define the status of women and their roles. Visible gender roles speaks about the gender division of labor. For example, you could see the many sectors for agriculture, healthcare industries, or the women are largely been the provider of healthcare services. In agriculture also, women could see agriculture is considered as an extension of the kitchen or extension of the household work. Therefore, largely women we could see in the agricultural sector. And whereas men you could see in pursuing science, or in pursuing science and mathematics, or in the field of technology. Therefore, the gender roles are quite visible when we come to labor market. Similarly, these gender roles are also visible in our home or within the family. These visible gender roles manifest the invisible power dynamics that exist between women and men in the society. Therefore, the invisibility of power relations, or what we can in a concept we can say that gender dynamics that will explain the status. So depending on the role of the women and men, their status or their social status have been defined not only in the family but outside of it. And with these, let us look at, with these concepts, in India, we have been able to mainstream gender into the development process. So now, in brief, we are going to discuss about women in the 5-year plans, or how Indian government has categorized or incorporated women component into the development process. And the first 5-year plan was instituted in the year was from 1951 to 56. The first 5-year plan was more of emphasize on welfare of women. So welfare of women was focused along with the welfare of socially disadvantaged groups, including destitute, disabled, aged, and so on. Second to 5th 5-year plans, welfare approach was there. But besides welfare approach, women's education was also prioritized. Along with women's education, improved maternal and child health services, supplementary feeding for children, and expectant and nursing mothers were also encouraged. 6th 5-year plan was from the period 1980 to 85. Shift in approach from welfare to development of women. So here you could see that during 6th 5-year plan, there was a shift in approach from welfare to development of women, which means they are not the only beneficiaries of the development process, but women can be actively involved in the development process. Therefore, multi-pronged approach was adopted by the government, having thrust on health, education, and employment. So we moved from focusing on one sector, and now we are taking multiple sectors for a holistic understanding of women's issues and how we can create a gender just society. In the 7th 5-year plan, which was from the period 1985 to 90, the 7th 5-year plan aimed at raising women's economic and social status, and it aimed at bringing them into the mainstream of national development. The thrust was on generation of both skilled and unskilled employment through proper education and vocational training. 8th 5-year plan was from the period 1992 to 97. The emphasis was on the development of women, with specific emphasis on empowering women as agents of social change and development. That during 8th 5-year plan, more emphasis was given on women's agency, that women have their own choices, have decision making, they can exercise agencies and actively participate in the process of social change and development. One of the familiar examples you could see how women in India, they have been involved in the self-help group activities. They are all part of different SSGs, and how through economic and empowerment, they are bringing about a change in their social positions as well. Ninth five-year plan was from the year 1997 to 2002. Significant changes was made in the conceptual strategy of planning for women's development. Attempted a focus on empowerment of women. The plan also aimed at convergence of existing services available in both women-specific and women-related sectors. And we are going to have a separate session on women-specific plans and programs in India in our further lectures. 10th five-year plan was from the year 2002 to 7. It continues with the strategy of initiating programs for women's empowerment through their social empowerment, economic empowerment, and by achieving gender justice. So we could realize that women's access to livelihood would not help unless and until their practical gender needs have been addressed, which is largely embedded in the social sphere. Therefore, social empowerment is equally important along with economic empowerment to be able to achieve a gender equitable or gender just society. The last plan which we are going to discuss is the 11th five-year plan in the year, from the year 2007 to 12. The 11th five-year plan emphasizes on the gender equity, gender budgeting, and creation of an environment free from all forms of violence against women. So with these, today's session we are going to conclude, and I hope today we discussed about how women's role and social positions have been defined not only through the social practices but myths and through traditions, as well as how feminists have offered different analytical framework to understand the social realities for women. And in the second part of this lecture, we discuss the relationship between women and development to be able to bring women's concern and issues into the mainstream development process. I hope you will enjoy this session, and we are going to have much more session on for this unit 1 as well as for other units of the course. Thank you.